Okay, now we're going to look at another important concept, and this is the concept of an array. Let's look at this data type here. We have a variable called name, and we're going to make it a string, which is actually in itself an array of characters, and we're going to assign the value of Joe. Now this string, an array of characters, has an element of J, O, and E, and that makes the name Joe. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create dim names. I'm going to give it a bracket, and I will say I'm going to hold three names, 0, 1, and 2, and I'm going to say as type string. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold an array of strings, and I can assign the values like this. Names element 0 is assigned the value of Mary. Names element 1 is assigned the value of Jim, and names element 2 is assigned the value of Jack. So it's an array of strings, it's called names, and I can hold a list, for instance. It's not a list, there's a different type called a list, but it's like that type of list. And it's useful in many different ways, as you'll find out later, but one of the things I can do with this, if I wish to print it out, is I can say for I equals 0, I'm going to loop to, let's just say to 2. I end my for, and I write console.writeLine, and then I can element, let's do it like this, element, and I'm going to use my squiggly brackets here for a variable is, and I use my squiggly brackets again because this time I'm going to have two variables. The first variable is going to be I, that's going to tell me which element I'm at. Then I use another, sorry, I need to end this string, this is a string, so I end it with double quote, comma, so element, variable I, and then the variable will be names bracket, and I put I in here, so that's going to change. Okay, so let's see what's going to happen here in this line. I'm going to loop around this array, and I will have the value of 0, and it's going to say element 0 is, and then it's going to give me names 0. Well, name 0 equals Mary. Then it's going to loop around again, 0 to 2, and this time I will have the value of 1, and it will say element 1 is, and then it will access names 1, which will be Jim. And let's just, I've got my console.readline there to hold it, so let's see how this works. Should we step through it? Or let's just run it. There we go. Element 0 is Mary, element 1 is Jim, element 2 is Jack. What I could do is I could take my console.readline, cut it, and paste it in here, in which case I can run it, and I get element 1 is Mary, freeze there, hit this, element 1 is Jim, and Jack. So I've got my console.readline in the loop, so that I can pause it each time I run through the loop. Let's look at assigning a value to the array. So here I've got values in the array, and what I could say is I could say for I equals 0 to 2, there's my for loop, and I say console.writeLine, enter a name, console.readline. Oh, what is that doing? So what I need to say is names I, let's assign the value of console.readline. So remember, I is going to increment, it's going to be 0, it runs through 1, and it runs through, and it'll be 2. So it's going to put it into these spaces here. And I'll just take this one, and I'm going to copy this, I'm going to paste it down here under, And the reason is what's going to happen is I'm going to run it. I initialize the array with these values. I print out these values. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and enter a name. So I'm going to overwrite these values into these spaces here. And then I'm going to loop around and print out the new values so that we can see that they've changed. So let's just run that. Mary, Jim, Jack, enter a name. Let's call it Josh. No, I've only got Jim. Josh, Jill, and Janet. And then I've got Josh, Jill, and Janet. Okay, and that's how I use a loop to assign the values to it. Now the array as a data type is very, very useful, because if I've got something that's similar, whether it's names or values, prices of things, and I might have 1 to 1,000, I can use a loop and I can enter all the data, and I can write the data, I can do calculations on the data, one element at a time, but I can repeat it throughout the entire loop. So an array is an important concept, and this is actually a one-dimensional array. It's like a row in a table, and there is something called a two-dimensional array, but we'll leave it here for now.